Do you see the $12 million resort standing over my shoulder? The one featuring marble fountains and attendants for parking? It was constructed on the land that was once my grandfather's farm. The same farm our family had held for 7 decades before a witch from a homeowners association decided she coveted it. I can still recall the scent of fresh cow manure mingling with her pricey perfume on the day she appeared, demanding I pay $450,000 in fines for violations. She claimed my roosters were excessively loud. She alleged my barn was a visual blight. She gave me 30 days to produce the money, or she would seize everything. Patricia Whitmore must have thought she was confronting some simple country fellow who would just submit and accept defeat. She was mistaken, utterly mistaken. That woman is currently serving a 3-year sentence in a federal penitentiary, and I am about to recount precisely how we brought about her downfall. First, however, consider what you would do if someone attempted to confiscate your family's land. Now, allow me to transport you to the beginning of this entire conflict. My grandfather, Earl Morrison, acquired these 127 acres in 1952, relying on nothing more than a loan secured by a handshake and a vow to repay it with earnings from milk sales. He developed it into one of the premier dairy farms in East Tennessee, complete with 3 barns, a creek flowing directly through the center, and sufficient pasture to maintain 40 head of cattle in plump, contented condition. For Earl, this was more than just property. It was the culmination of his life's efforts. He manually set every fence post and personally hammered every barn board into place. He would often say to me, "Jake, a man's value isn't determined by his possessions, but by the legacy he constructs for the succeeding generation." When Earl died in 2019, he bequeathed everything to me: the farm, the cherished memories, and regrettably, $89,000 in medical bills. I'm Jake Morrison, age 34, and I've earned my living by swinging a hammer since I was 18. I wasn't exactly prepared to manage a dairy farm, but I was determined not to let any bank seize what my grandfather had poured his lifeblood into. The initial hint of trouble surfaced in 2020 with the commencement of construction on the Willowbrook Estates right next to my land. All at once, my farm was no longer enclosed by tobacco fields and mature oak trees. Instead, I had sprawling McMansions, valued between $400,000 and $800,000, looking down upon my weathered barn as if it were some sort of historical disgrace. The HOA was established even before the first family had moved in. That ought to have been my primary warning sign, but I was too preoccupied with devising a plan to settle Earl's medical debts to give any thought to a group of city dwellers engaging in neighborhood power plays. Then, I encountered Patricia Whitmore, and my world descended into chaos. Imagine the scene. It's 7 o'clock in the morning. I am outside tending to the chickens when a spotless white BMW X5 crunches its way up my gravel driveway, as if it holds the deed. A flawlessly coiffed woman emerges, dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that likely cost more than my monthly mortgage. She possesses that counterfeit Southern Belle accent, which sounds as sweet as molasses, yet has the sharpness of a razor. "Good morning," she utters, navigating around a puddle with care in her designer footwear. "I am Patricia Whitmore, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I think we must have a conversation about your problem." Now, I've lived with the sound of roosters crowing at daybreak my entire life. However, it seems this constitutes a violation when your neighbors believe that rural living should be as tranquil as a meditation seminar. Patricia is standing there, clipboard in hand, checking off infringements as if she were pronouncing a death sentence. "Excessive noise before 8 a.m., she declares, gesturing toward my rooster as though he were a felon. "Unsightly agricultural buildings visible from the roadway. Odors impacting the value of adjacent properties." She takes a moment, her nose wrinkling at the aroma of fresh manure blending with her costly perfume. "Mr. Morrison, I am certain you appreciate that circumstances have evolved in this area. We have standards that must be upheld." I am clenching that fence post with such force that I can feel the splinters pressing into my hand. "Ma'am," I say to her, "my grandfather was milking cows on this land when all of this was nothing but tobacco fields. If you have an issue with roosters, perhaps you ought not to have constructed your luxury homes adjacent to a functional farm." She offers a smile that fails to reach her eyes. "Oh, I believe you will discover that is not quite how things operate any longer. The Willowbrook Estates covenants explicitly state that any activities that compromise the community's quality of life may be liable for mitigation fees. A sum of $500 per month should compensate for the disturbance to your neighbors. $500 a month for the offense of farming on land that my family had possessed for 70 years. And what if I decline? I inquire. That smile of hers becomes even more frigid. Well, in that case, I imagine we will need to investigate alternative legal measures. I am an attorney, Mr. Morrison. I am sure you would rather resolve this matter amicably than expensively. As she returns to her BMW, my German Shepherd, Rex, begins to bark furiously. The sound reverberates off those opulent houses as if he's heralding a declaration of war. Patricia flinches, nearly trips in her heels, and gives me a look that could make hell freeze. It was in that moment I understood this was not about noise issues or property assessments. This was a struggle for power, and Patricia Whitmore had just initiated a conflict with the wrong farmer's grandson. Patricia wasted no time in demonstrating what she meant by other legal remedies. 2 weeks following our little conversation by the fence, I received a certified letter that sent my blood pressure soaring like a thermometer in July. It was an Environmental Protection Agency complaint filed by concerned citizens regarding potential contamination of groundwater from my cattle operation. But here was the crucial detail. The complaint was filled with technical jargon about nitrogen runoff coefficients and bacterial load thresholds that no typical neighbor would possess. This was clearly a professional attack. The EPA inspector arrived on a Tuesday morning in a government-issue sedan, appearing as at ease on my farm as a penguin would be in Phoenix. He was a decent fellow, reminding me of my science teacher from high school, but he was there to perform his duty. He took water samples from the creek, soil samples from the pasture, and even measured the air quality near the barn. Just conducting a follow-up on a complaint, he explained as he put on rubber gloves. It's likely nothing to be concerned about, but someone submitted a very comprehensive report. We are obligated to investigate these matters. 3 weeks later, the results arrived, accompanied by an invoice for $3,200. Every single one of the tests showed results that were cleaner than a clergyman's conscience. The water quality was excellent, the soil composition was ideal, and the air quality surpassed that of downtown Nashville on a clear day. Yet, that was irrelevant. I was still indebted to the EPA for their services and testing. While I was struggling to figure out how to cover the cost of EPA tests on a construction worker's wages, the local newspaper published a front-page article, "Farm Practices Under Investigation." Not "Farm Cleared of Environmental Concerns" or "False Complaint Wastes Taxpayer Money." Just "Under Investigation," as if I were managing some sort of hazardous waste facility instead of just raising cattle. That was the point at which I chose to investigate further. I went to the county clerk's office, that old, musty building that smells of coffee and 4 decades of official paperwork, and began to review public records, HOA formation papers, development permits, legal filings, all public information accessible for the cost of making copies. And it was there that I discovered the critical evidence. The law firm Whitmore and Associates had managed all the legal aspects of the Willowbrook Estates development. The same Patricia Whitmore who was now the HOA president was the very same Patricia Whitmore who had drafted the HOA's rules in the first place. She had, in effect, fashioned the very instrument she was now wielding against me. Equipped with this information, I resolved to go to my first HOA meeting. These meetings were held monthly in the community center, a structure that had once been a one-room schoolhouse before its renovation with marble flooring and crystal chandeliers. Because nothing exemplifies community solidarity like investing $200,000 in a meeting space. I entered, wearing my most presentable work shirt and boots that I had taken the time to scrub clean. About 20 neighbors were seated in folding chairs, with most of them averting their gaze as if I carried some infectious agricultural malady. However, I observed something noteworthy. A couple of the older residents, those who could recall when the area was all farmland, offered me slight nods of encouragement. Patricia was presiding at the front, going over the monthly financial reports as if she were in charge of IBM rather than a local HOA. When she spotted me, her feigned smile materialized quicker than a summer storm. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her tone a mix of honey and malice, "how kind of you to attend. I hope you have had an opportunity to reflect on our earlier discussion regarding community standards." I rose to my feet, clutching my collection of documents. In fact, I have been conducting some inquiries. It appears your law firm established this HOA and authored all of its regulations. That is quite remarkable, given that you are now employing those very rules to demand money from me. The room fell completely silent. The hum of the air conditioning was audible. Patricia's smile vanished as if it were smoke caught in a hurricane. I am not certain what you are suggesting, she stated, but her voice had lost its saccharine quality. My professional credentials are the very reason this community entrusts me with upholding our standards. Standards that involve submitting fraudulent EPA complaints filled with technical language that could only originate from someone with legal expertise, I countered. It's curious how that happens. At this point, Patricia's face was flushing red beneath her expensive foundation. A number of neighbors began to whisper to one another. Not all of them seemed pleased with their HOA leader anymore. Furthermore, I went on, I find it curious that you have already been in communication with county officials regarding my property. It makes one wonder what other intentions you might have. That final statement was a complete gamble, but the way Patricia's eyes widened confirmed that I had struck a nerve. She possessed knowledge about county planning that I did not. This meeting is concluded, she declared, striking her gavel like a judge dismissing a case. If you have personal complaints, Mr. Morrison, you should address them through the appropriate legal avenues. As the attendees were leaving, the elderly Mary Beth Chun, one of the few residents who had lived in the area prior to the new development, paused beside my chair. Your grandfather was a fine man, she whispered. Do not allow that woman to tear down what he created. It was then that I understood this was no longer merely about HOA dues. Patricia had more ambitious designs for my land, and I was on the verge of discovering the full extent of this conspiracy. Mary Beth's sentiment clung to me like burrs on a flannel shirt. In the week that followed, I started to monitor the activities surrounding my property more closely. What I discovered made my grandfather's tales of corrupt officials seem like children's fables. Patricia was not merely lodging complaints. She was orchestrating a comprehensive campaign of harassment. I was subjected to 3 unannounced inspections from the county health department within 2 weeks, all conveniently arranged on days when I was at my construction job. Each inspection forced me to lose half a day's earnings to hurry back and address inspectors who were searching for non-existent infractions. The man from the health department, a poor fellow just carrying out his duties, appeared as baffled as I was. Someone reported unsanitary conditions for the livestock, he informed me, while standing in my immaculate barn, which Earl had kept as pristine as a surgical suite. But to be frank, Mr. Morrison, this is one of the most well-maintained operations I've encountered. Well-maintained or not, each inspection resulted in official reports, and those reports led to fees. A charge of $50 here, $75 there. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. The costs were just high enough to be painful, but not substantial enough to warrant hiring legal counsel. However, Patricia's greatest error was her growing avarice. She began enlisting other members of the HOA board to submit separate complaints. Karen Henderson from the Pink House filed noise violations. Bob Mitchell, who owned the green Tesla, complained of unpleasant smells. Property boundary disagreements were lodged by 3 different neighbors, all within a 24-hour period. That was when I chose to embark on a search through my grandfather's attic. Earl was a collector who never discarded a single piece of paper. He had birth certificates from 1932, tax documents from the Eisenhower era, and every receipt for every nail he had ever purchased. Yet, concealed beneath layers of memories, I unearthed something that caused my heart to race like a drum in a rock band. It was the original property survey from 1952, drawn by hand and authenticated by the county surveyor. According to those faint pencil markings, my land extended 40 feet past the point where I had always assumed the boundary lay. Those 40 feet now encompassed the HOA's prized community playground, with its $15,000 swing set and rubber mulch that was more expensive per square foot than the carpet in my own home. I laid out that aged, yellow document on my kitchen table as if I were strategizing a military operation. I compared it with the contemporary surveys from the development and re-examined the property markers still fixed in the old oak trees. There was no ambiguity. The Willowbrook Estates HOA had constructed their community playground on my property. With this new information, I acted as any red-blooded American in this digital era would. I shared a comparison of the surveys on the Willowbrook Estates Facebook page, accompanied by a straightforward caption, an interesting find regarding property boundaries. You might want to re-examine those HOA lines. The reaction was swifter than a fox in a chicken coop. In less than 2 hours, I received 17 comments and 3 private messages from neighbors who were suddenly quite anxious about their own property borders. The highlight was Patricia Whitmore's response, written in capital letters. This is harassment and intimidation. I am speaking with my attorney. Nothing signals a guilty conscience quite like a threat to involve lawyers over a social media post. But Patricia had not finished her dirty tactics. 2 days after my social media post, I returned home from my job to see a sheriff's deputy's vehicle in my driveway. The deputy looked as out of place as a cat with a long tail in a room full of rocking chairs. "Mr. Morrison," he stated, tipping his hat as if we were in an old western, "I have a complaint here alleging that you have been making threats to your neighbors. Ms. Whitmore has requested a restraining order." The irony was as palpable as the taste of copper in my mouth. Threatening in what way, exactly? He produced a file as thick as a phone book. It states here that you have engaged in a campaign of harassment, published menacing messages online, and made intimidating remarks about your legal recourse concerning their property. Legal recourse? That was Patricia's interpretation of me mentioning I had discovered an old survey. In her view, finding out that you own the land someone else has built upon constituted intimidation. The hearing was set for the next Friday. Patricia arrived in a navy blue power suit that communicated serious lawyer, accompanied by 2 associates who appeared to have been cast in a legal television series. I came in my most presentable work attire, carrying a folder of documents and a dawning realization that I was about to be educated on the true workings of the system. The judge, a weary-looking man who had likely presided over countless minor neighbor conflicts, listened to Patricia's account of my supposed pattern of harassment and indirect threats toward the community. She portrayed me as a deranged farmer who was terrorizing blameless suburban families with his hazardous farm machinery and hostile social media activity. When my turn came to speak, I began to explain about the property survey and the harassment I had been subjected to. But the judge silenced me with a dismissive gesture. "Mr. Morrison, I am granting a temporary restraining order. You are prohibited from contacting any HOA board members or posting about them on social media. Any breach of this order will lead to your immediate arrest." Leaving that courtroom, I felt like David up against Goliath, but armed with a rubber band for a slingshot. Patricia had thoroughly outmaneuvered me, and she was well aware of it. As I went past her in the corridor, she came near enough for me to smell that costly perfume once more. "You should have chosen the simpler path," she whispered. "Now, it will cost you everything." It was then I understood that this was about more than just property lines or HOA dues. Patricia Whitmore was involved in a far more significant contest, and I was on the verge of discovering her true motives. Patricia's restraining order was akin to giving a loaded weapon to someone who was already taking shots at you. In just 1 week, she had transformed that court order into a massive legal onslaught that would have made General Sherman's campaign through Georgia seem like a leisurely walk. The first move was a motion to compel the sale of my land due to it being a public nuisance. She was no longer content with just fines. She wanted me out entirely. The legal document was denser than a Sunday paper and composed in a legal jargon that could make one's eyes blur. Yet, the essence was clear. My farm was supposedly such a danger to public well-being and safety that the sole recourse was its forced auction. Then she called in her allies. Whitmore and Associates were suddenly joined by co-counsel from Nashville, Barnes, Mitchell, and Cross, the type of prestigious law firm whose hourly rates exceeded my weekly earnings. These were not local attorneys involved in minor disputes. They were legal specialists in land acquisition. I managed to gather what funds I could and retained Jimmy Fitzgerald, a local lawyer who had managed Earl's estate. Jimmy was a decent, honest, and diligent man, the kind of attorney who still valued justice over accumulating billable hours. However, seeing him confront Patricia's legal force was like watching a high school pitcher take on a professional baseball team. "Jake," he said to me over a cup of coffee at the local diner, laying out the legal papers on the table as if they were war plans. "I'm going to be frank with you. They are requesting an emergency hearing to confiscate your property in 30 days. The judge who issued the restraining order appears to be in favor of their community standards argument. 30 days. 70 years of my family's heritage, and they intended to wipe it out in just 30 days. It was at this point that sheer desperation led me back to Earl's attic, rummaging through boxes I had never thought to check before. There were old holiday decorations, yellowed photos, and receipt books from the 1960s. And at the very bottom of a cardboard box labeled Important Papers, I discovered a set of letters that made my heart stop. It was correspondence from 1995, sent to Earl Morrison from the Tennessee Natural Gas Exploration Company. The letterhead was elaborate, the wording was official, but the intent was unmistakable. They were seeking to lease our mineral rights for the purpose of natural gas drilling. I laid out those 27-year-old letters on the kitchen table, my hands trembling like leaves in a gale. As stated in the letters, Earl's land was situated above what geologists termed significant shale gas reserves. The first proposal was for $50,000 merely for the lease rights, in addition to royalties on any gas they might extract. Earl had unequivocally refused them. His handwritten reply, a carbon copy in his tidy farmer's script, was pure Earl Morrison. I appreciate your interest, but this land is meant for cultivation, not for excavation. Your offer is declined. But here was the critical detail. Those letters indicated that recent progress in drilling methods had made previously unprofitable reserves suddenly quite lucrative. And that was back in 1995. What would those same reserves be valued at 30 years later? I dedicated the following 3 days to researching all I could on natural gas prices, hydraulic fracturing, and drilling regulations in Tennessee. My findings made my grandfather's old refusal seem like the most brilliant business move in our family's history. Current natural gas prices were triple what they had been in 1995, and advanced horizontal drilling methods allowed for the extraction of gas from formations that were unreachable in the past. My 127 acres were potentially situated on millions of dollars worth of natural gas. With this new information, I began contacting contemporary drilling firms. The interest was instant and strong. Tennessee Energy Partners proposed sending a geologist over within 48 hours. Appalachian Gas and Oil requested to arrange a meeting immediately. Every firm I contacted showed a sudden, keen interest in the Morrison family farm. Yet, Patricia somehow learned about my discussions with the drilling companies. I knew because she appeared at my door the next morning, earlier than her usual visits, looking as if she hadn't slept a wink. Her flawless hairstyle and pristine makeup were gone. This was Patricia Whitmore with her facade cracking, and what I saw beneath was not pleasant. "We must speak," she stated, moving past me into my kitchen uninvited. "Regarding your recent business activities." I poured a cup of coffee for myself, not extending the offer to her. "I am not permitted to speak with you. If I recall correctly, there's a restraining order in effect." "Enough of that, Morrison." Her voice had shed all semblance of Southern charm. "I am aware you've been in contact with gas companies. That is a poor decision. A very poor decision." "It's a funny thing about poor decisions," I retorted, leaning on my kitchen counter. "It seems many have been made recently, such as constructing playgrounds on another person's land or submitting false EPA reports. Or perhaps failing to disclose that the land you're attempting to acquire is sitting on a natural gas fortune." Patricia's face turned as pale as fresh snow. "You fail to grasp what you are up against. This is no longer merely an HOA matter. There are individuals involved who do not appreciate complications." "What individuals?" She rose, adjusting her jacket as if it were a suit of armor. "Influential people. People with substantial means. People who have made considerable investments in the development prospects of this region. You can accept our substantial offer and leave with sufficient funds to purchase a comfortable home elsewhere, or you can oppose us and forfeit everything." After her departure, I remained in my kitchen, looking at the old letters from Earl's box. My grandfather had sensed something unique about this land. He had rejected an amount of money that could have transformed his life because he knew that certain things hold a value beyond monetary worth. I was now beginning to grasp why Patricia Whitmore desired my farm so desperately, and why she was prepared to ruin my life to obtain it. I required information, and I required it immediately. Patricia's allusion to people with resources was not a threat to be taken lightly when dealing with an underground asset worth millions. Consequently, I reached out to my former Army comrade, Marcus Thompson, who had been operating a private investigation firm in Nashville since our military service ended. Marcus arrived 2 days later in a worn-out Ford pickup that appeared as harmless as a puppy, which was precisely his intention. In our profession, he often said, the most effective surveillance vehicle is one that goes unnoticed. Jake, he said, shaking my hand with a solid grip that conjured memories of desert patrols and late-night guard shifts. You certainly have a knack for getting into noteworthy conflicts. In less than 48 hours, Marcus had unearthed more compromising information on Patricia Whitmore than a construction excavator could dig up. It became clear that our esteemed HOA president was not merely a small-town lawyer with grand aspirations. She was deeply entangled in debt, desperation, and what Marcus termed unconventional financial dealings. Your Ms. Whitmore has a gambling issue, Marcus informed me, arranging photos and financial records on my kitchen table. Atlantic City, Las Vegas, those riverboat casinos in Mississippi. She has been losing money heavily for years. The figures were astounding. Credit card liabilities exceeding $200,000, a second mortgage on her house in Nashville, and personal loans from creditors that Marcus characterized as not the sort of individuals you want to be indebted to. Yet, the most conclusive evidence was found within corporate registration papers that Marcus had obtained from the Secretary of State's office. Whitmore and Associates was not only the legal firm that managed the Willowbrook Estates project. Patricia was also a personal owner of a 15% share in the development company itself. She is more than just your HOA president, Marcus clarified, indicating a complex network of shell corporations and financial links that resemble the conspiracy theorists' wildest imaginings. She has been orchestrating this land acquisition for years. The HOA intimidation, the legal duress, it's all part of a plan to compel you to sell at a price far below its actual value. Then Marcus presented the most significant piece of information. He had discovered a geological report from 2018 that had been ordered by an entity named Tennessee Resource Development LLC, yet another front company within Patricia's web of corporate structures. The report encompassed a 12-square-mile region that included both my farm and the entirety of Willowbrook Estates. The projected value of the extractable natural gas reserves was between $8 and $12 million. Your grandfather's farm is not merely situated on a gas deposit, Marcus stated, pointing to the geological diagrams. It is the primary entry point for the entire reserve. Without access to your land, they are unable to reach any of it. That is the reason she is so desperate to remove you. I looked at those survey charts, feeling as though I had been both sucker-punched and had won the lottery simultaneously. $12 million in natural gas, and Patricia Whitmore had been attempting to acquire it through $500 monthly HOA dues. There is more, Marcus added. The Willowbrook Estates project is not genuinely a residential development. It is a facade. Those luxurious homes are merely a smokescreen for what is intended to be a natural gas processing facility. The resort they are constructing is planned to be the operational plant. All at once, everything fell into a horrifyingly clear perspective. The high-end houses were to lend legitimacy to the project. The HOA was to manage the surrounding lands. The methodical harassment was to drive out anyone who might raise probing questions. Patricia had not only been trying to take my land, she had been executing a deception that would have impressed even P.T. Barnum. What is our next step? I inquired. Marcus flashed a grin like a wolf that has just cornered an especially plump lamb. We are going to give Ms. Whitmore exactly what she has been seeking, a confrontation. But this time, the fight will be on our own terms. That evening, I sat on Earl's old porch swing, hearing the creek murmur and the cattle settling in for the night. My grandfather used to say that the land would provide for the family if the family cared for the land. He just failed to mention that sometimes caring for the land involves engaging in a battle with those who wish to take it. But a battle was precisely what Patricia Whitmore was about to receive. Marcus's discovery altered the entire situation. This was no longer a simple David versus Goliath scenario. This was David versus Goliath. But David had just learned he was positioned on a mountain of gold that Goliath had been attempting to acquire through a fraudulent charity drive. Within a day, I had convened a council of war in my kitchen that resembled a scene from a political suspense film. There was Marcus Thompson, with his collection of surveillance photographs and financial records. Jimmy Fitzgerald, with his legal papers and volumes of Tennessee law, and my cousin, Tommy Morrison, who had come from Nashville, where he was an investigative journalist for Channel 5 News. "All right," I declared, spreading Earl's old survey charts alongside Marcus's up-to-date geological findings. "Patricia believes she is engaged in a game of chess while I am playing checkers. It is time to reveal that I have been playing poker all along." Our plan consisted of 3 key components, much like a military strategy that Earl would have endorsed. First was the legal assault. Jimmy began filing motions with the rapidity of a machine gun. There was a challenge to the HOA's jurisdiction over a pre-existing property, a motion to set aside all violation citations due to selective application, and the most significant one, an ethics complaint filed with the Tennessee Bar Association regarding Patricia's undisclosed conflicts of interest. "Here is something most people are unaware of," Jimmy clarified, producing a substantial volume on legal ethics. "When an attorney represents several clients with opposing interests without full disclosure, it constitutes grounds for being disbarred. Patricia's representation of both the HOA and the development firm, while also personally benefiting from forced property sales, is as unethical as one can get." The second component was the financial inquiry. Marcus was pursuing the money trail with the tenacity of a bloodhound on the scent of a fugitive. He followed Patricia's front companies across 3 states and uncovered links to a Nashville development firm that had connections to energy companies from other states. "She is not the primary architect," Marcus informed us, indicating a flowchart that resembled a corporate genealogy created by someone under the influence of psychedelics. "She is in a middle management role. The primary funding originates from Apex Energy Solutions in Houston. They have been acquiring mineral rights throughout Tennessee by using front companies and local agents." The genius of Marcus's inquiry was that all the information was substantiated by public records. There were corporate registrations, property deeds, and even Patricia's gambling losses, which were recorded through casino loyalty programs she had foolishly joined under her own name. The third component was the media approach. Tommy had contacts all over the Nashville media landscape and was already presenting the story to his investigative unit. "HOA corruption is a major topic at the moment," Tommy explained, swiping through his phone to show examples. "People are tired of these minor neighborhood despots. But this goes beyond mere HOA misconduct. This is corporate fraud disguised as HOA harassment. That is a front-page story." The strategy was beautifully straightforward. We would allow Patricia to believe she was still in control while we constructed a solid case against her. Jimmy would continue to handle the legal disputes in the public eye while secretly drafting the ethics complaint. Marcus would persist in gathering evidence of Patricia's financial wrongdoings, and Tommy would get ready a media expose to be released at a time that would ensure the greatest possible effect. However, we required one additional component: the backing of the community. This is where Mary Beth Chun proved to be our invaluable asset. It turned out that the gentle, elderly widow was a retired school principal who had been organizing community functions since before Patricia was even born. Over coffee and homemade biscuits that could have won accolades at the state fair, Mary Beth disclosed that Patricia had been targeting other property owners as well. "The Hendersons were fined because their vegetable patch was deemed unsightly," Mary Beth recounted, her voice filled with the moral indignation of someone who has spent 4 decades confronting bullies. "Bob Mitchell received a citation because his solar panels were the incorrect shade. And don't even get me started on what she did to the widow Thompson concerning her late husband's workshop." Mary Beth's circle of neighbors, the ones who could recall when the area was all farmland and the word community signified something more than just property assessments, was already mobilizing, discreetly, cautiously, but mobilizing all the same. In the meantime, I was getting ready my own surprise, utilizing the documentation of Earl's mineral rights. I had been in talks with Tennessee Energy Partners for a proper drilling lease, not the kind of extraction operation that Patricia's associates intended to construct, but a modern, eco-friendly drilling method that would preserve the surface of the land. The contract was laid out on my kitchen table, awaiting my signature. $12 million over 10 years, with an initial payment of $1.2 million to be made upon signing. This would not only resolve all my financial difficulties, but also render Patricia's entire plot worthless. "The beautiful thing," Marcus remarked with a grin like a cat that has cornered its prey. is that she has put herself in a corner. The more she pressures you, the more proof we accumulate of her campaign of harassment, and the restraining order keeps her from discovering our actual plans. As our council of war dispersed that evening, I felt something I had not felt in a long time: hope. Not just the hope of retaining my land, but the hope that justice might actually prevail in a world where financial power usually dominates. Patricia Whitmore believed she was playing a game where she set all the rules. She was about to discover that some games do not conclude as anticipated. Patricia's overassurance was beginning to show, like fissures in a dam on the verge of collapse. Perhaps it was the pressure of her gambling liabilities, or maybe she sensed that her flawless little plot was starting to come apart. In any case, she started to make the kind of rash decisions that distinguish the skilled from the unskilled. First, she quickened her schedule. What had been a gradual campaign of harassment suddenly intensified. The county commission meeting to review the economic development potential of my land was advanced by 3 weeks. Patricia began to appear at local business gatherings, speaking of employment opportunities and tax income, as if she were a candidate for mayor rather than someone attempting to seize a farm. The presentation she delivered to the Rotary Club would have been remarkable if it were not founded on falsehoods thicker than syrup. She displayed charts with projected job figures and tax revenue figures that suggested my small farm would single-handedly finance the entire county budget. She even had architectural mock-ups of the proposed Tennessee Gateway Energy Center, a structure of glass and steel and modern design, situated exactly where Earl's barn now stood. But Patricia's gravest error was misjudging the extent of her own desperation and the lengths she would go to in order to safeguard her plan. I discovered just how far when I arrived home from work on a Thursday evening to find that my farmhouse had been broken into. Not robbed, but burglarized. They had searched the house as if they were seeking something particular, and they had located it. Every paper concerning Earl's estate, every piece of mail about mineral rights, every survey chart and property title was gone. The strange thing was, they had left all the valuable items. My grandfather's antique Winchester rifle remained hanging above the mantelpiece. Earl's coin collection was undisturbed on the kitchen counter. Even my laptop and television were right where I had left them. But every document that could substantiate my family's claim to the mineral rights had disappeared as if it were smoke. The sheriff's deputy who documented the incident was the same one who had delivered Patricia's restraining order. He moved through my house with the same level of interest as someone looking into a lost cat, making notes that likely said items were disturbed and homeowner appears distressed. "Do you have any idea who might have done this?" he inquired, as if he were reciting from a manual. "Yes," I replied. "Someone who wants to prevent me from having evidence of my mineral rights." He gave me a look that suggested he thought I had been watching too many films about conspiracies. "Mr. Morrison, perhaps you should think about the possibility that someone was searching for valuables and simply created a mess. These kinds of rural burglaries are common. Rural burglaries where only property documents are taken. Is that it? But here is the issue with trying to eliminate evidence in this modern age. It is more difficult than one might think. I had previously scanned and saved copies of Earl's most crucial documents to a cloud storage service that Marcus had arranged. The intruders took the physical copies, but the legal information remained secure. More significantly, they had just committed a federal offense. Unlawful entry with the intent to obstruct a legal case is not merely burglary, it is obstruction of justice. And due to the security cameras that Marcus had put in place the week prior, we had captured everything on video. Well, almost everything. The camera aimed at my back door had mysteriously ceased to function just hours before the break-in. The kind of malfunction that occurs when someone knowledgeable about surveillance systems wants to create a blind spot. However, the camera monitoring my driveway recorded something noteworthy. A white BMW X5 was parked on the road for 20 minutes during the time of the burglary. Patricia was becoming careless, and careless criminals provide the best kind of evidence. The next move came via the rumor mill that thrives in small towns. And signed leaflets began to be placed on car windshields throughout the area, casting doubt on my financial soundness and mental condition. The wording was carefully chosen to avoid direct falsehoods, but was intended to sow seeds of suspicion about the eccentric farmer who was obstructing economic progress. The leaflets referred to my history of conflict with neighbors and a pattern of harassment against community leaders. They discussed how resisting the energy development project would deprive the county of hundreds of jobs and millions in tax dollars. These were classic divide-and-conquer strategies, casting me as the antagonist in my own narrative. But the smear campaign had a spectacularly negative outcome when Mary Beth Chun came across one of the leaflets. She identified the high-quality paper and the professional design, the same type used by Patricia's law firm for their promotional materials. More importantly, she recognized the legal disclaimers at the bottom, composed in the same legal jargon that Patricia employed in all her HOA correspondence. "Honey," Mary Beth said to me over coffee, brandishing the leaflet as if it were evidence in a murder investigation. "Patricia Whitmore may be an attorney, but she is not very skilled at hiding her actions. This document has her figurative fingerprints all over it." It was then that I understood Patricia was not just becoming desperate, she was becoming reckless. And reckless adversaries are prone to errors, the kind of errors that shift a defensive position to an offensive one and transform victims into victors. All I needed to do was provide her with enough rope to hang herself. Fortunately, Patricia Whitmore seemed to have an ample supply of rope, and she was tying knots as quickly as she could. Patricia's desperation escalated to full-blown panic when she understood that her meticulously planned schedule was dissolving like sand slipping through her grasp. The county commission meeting was set for the upcoming Friday, and she required me to be out of the picture before that day. Not merely silenced, not just submissive, completely removed. It was at this point that she committed her most perilous error to date. On Monday morning, she submitted an emergency motion, asserting that I represented an imminent threat to the community. The legal documents read like a passage from a suspense novel, depicting me as an unstable farmer with a record of aggression and unpredictable conduct. She asserted that I had been making threats to neighbors, hoarding firearms, and exhibiting signs of growing mental decline. The proof was entirely fabricated, sworn statements from concerned neighbors detailing events that never occurred, police reports that were submitted but never followed up on, and even a psychiatric assessment from a physician I had never encountered, which claimed I was suffering from paranoid delusions concerning property rights. Jimmy Fitzgerald contacted me at 6 in the morning, his voice strained with anxiety. "Jake, they are seeking immediate confiscation of your property, subject to a mental health assessment. The hearing is scheduled for this afternoon. They are no longer playing games. But here is the issue with emergency motions. They must be founded on genuine emergencies." And Patricia's fabricated emergency was about to be confronted with Marcus's solid evidence. You see, while Patricia was occupied with creating false psychological reports, Marcus had been documenting her true mental condition. There were surveillance images of her at 3 different casinos within the last month, recorded phone conversations where she had lost her temper with bill collectors, and financial statements revealing increasingly unpredictable spending habits that suggested addiction rather than a business strategy. "Your HOA president," Marcus informed me, laying out the most recent collection of photographs, "has been gambling with funds that are not hers. HOA money, client trust funds, even her law firm's operational budget. She is not just desperate, she is bankrupt and terrified." The emergency hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock that afternoon. Patricia arrived with her complete legal entourage, appearing like a prosecutor prepared to send a mass murderer to prison. She had even brought along someone who seemed to be a court-appointed psychiatrist, ready to provide testimony about my supposed mental shortcomings. But when Jimmy rose to make our defense, he did not address my mental condition. Instead, he summoned Marcus to the witness stand. "Your Honor," Jimmy began, "we wish to submit evidence that this emergency motion is a component of a methodical fraud intended to unlawfully acquire Mr. Morrison's property for personal enrichment." Marcus's testimony unfolded like a meticulously planned demolition. He presented bank statements detailing Patricia's gambling losses, corporate records exposing her financial stake in the development firm, surveillance photos that placed her near my property just before the break-in, and even recorded phone calls in which she had discussed how to handle the Morrison problem with unidentified individuals. The judge, a different one this time as the original judge had abruptly stepped down for unstated reasons, listened to 3 hours of testimony with the look of someone observing a slow-motion catastrophe. But the true bombshell dropped when Tommy's journalist colleague entered the courtroom, accompanied by a camera team from Channel 5 News. It turns out that emergency hearings concerning mental health assessments are matters of public record, and the media has a full right to report on them. Patricia's face turned ashen when she noticed the cameras. All at once, her emergency motion regarding my supposed dangerous mental state was revealed for what it truly was: a desperate maneuver to seize property while being filmed. Your Honor, the judge stated after reviewing all the evidence, I am not only rejecting this emergency motion, but I am also forwarding this entire case to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation for a criminal inquiry. This court will not be exploited as an instrument for what is clearly a systematic fraud. As we departed from the courthouse, Patricia confronted me in the corridor one final time. Her flawless demeanor had completely vanished, replaced by the kind of frantic desperation one sees in a trapped animal. You have no comprehension of what you have just done, she hissed, her voice loud enough for the news cameras to capture. This was your final opportunity to leave with something. Now you will lose everything. And I mean everything. Is that a threat, Ms. Whitmore? Tommy inquired, raising his phone to capture her reaction. Patricia saw she was being recorded and attempted to retract her statement. But the harm was already done. Her threat against me was now officially documented, in public, before witnesses and cameras. That evening, the lead story on the local news was HOA president implicated in property fraud scheme. Tommy's report was a devastating exposé, detailing the entire conspiracy with a clear, engaging narrative that made intricate legal matters easy for the public to understand. But the most satisfying part was the footage of Patricia's reaction, the instant she knew she had been exposed, captured in flawless high definition and aired in every household in Middle Tennessee. As I sat on Earl's porch that night, listening to the creak and observing the fireflies flickering around the barn, I experienced a sensation I hadn't felt in months: the tranquility that precedes a victory. Patricia Whitmore had used every card she had, and each one had been a loser. The county commission meeting was the next day, and I was finally prepared to reveal my trump card. The county courthouse had never witnessed a gathering like the one that filled every chair, lined every wall, and overflowed into the corridor on that Friday morning. News had spread through social media with the speed of a wildfire in a dry field, and it appeared as if a significant portion of Middle Tennessee had come to observe Patricia Whitmore's empire collapse in real time. I entered that courthouse carrying a leather briefcase that had belonged to my grandfather, the very one he had carried when he purchased the farm in 1952. Contained within were documents that would alter the course of events: the executed drilling lease with Tennessee Energy Partners, Marcus's comprehensive financial investigation, and Jimmy's ethics complaint against Patricia, which was prepared for submission to the Tennessee Bar Association. Patricia was already seated at the front table, encircled by her legal counsel like a general getting ready for a final stand. She appeared as impeccable as ever, dressed in a navy blue power suit, with every strand of hair perfectly in place and makeup applied with the precision of a surgeon. But I could detect the weaknesses in her defense: the subtle shake in her hands, the way her gaze repeatedly shifted towards the crowded gallery as if searching for an exit. The county commissioners entered, looking as though they would prefer to be anywhere else in the world. These were local officials who had been elected to discuss road maintenance and zoning issues, not to handle federal fraud inquiries and intense media scrutiny. Commissioner Hayes, the chairman, called the meeting to order with the same level of enthusiasm as a man presiding over his own funeral. We are convened to deliberate on the economic development plan for the Morrison property. Ms. Whitmore, you may begin your presentation. Patricia rose and delivered the performance of a lifetime. She presented charts and graphs illustrating job growth figures and tax income estimates that made the project seem like the economic savior of the entire county. She displayed artists' impressions of the gleaming Tennessee Gateway Energy Center that promised to bring wealth to all. Ladies and gentlemen, she declared, her voice filled with that sweet Southern charm that had deceived so many for so long. This is a $12 million investment in the future of our community. It will create 200 permanent jobs and generate $5 million in annual tax revenue. The decision is straightforward: progress or decline. The audience responded with appreciative murmurs. Patricia's presentation was slick, professional, and persuasive. If you were unaware of the real story, you might have thought she was proposing the opportunity of a lifetime. Then Commissioner Hayes opened the floor for public statements, and I rose to my feet. "My name is Jake Morrison," I began, approaching the podium with Earl's briefcase. "I am the owner of the property under discussion. I wish to provide some information that Ms. Whitmore may have neglected to include." I opened the briefcase and took out Marcus's financial investigation. "Patricia Whitmore has a 15% stake in the development firm that is requesting you to confiscate my land. She has been exploiting her role as HOA president to pressure me into selling at a price far below its market value. And she has done all of this while concealing the fact that my property is situated on natural gas reserves valued at over $10 million. The courtroom erupted with the sound of a stadium cheering a winning score. Patricia jumped up, her face bright red. "This is harassment. Mr. Morrison is subject to a restraining order." "Actually," Jimmy Fitzgerald interjected, rising with a legal paper in hand, "that restraining order was nullified this morning when you were formally charged with obstruction of justice." I then presented the second major piece of evidence, the executed drilling lease. I have already leased my mineral rights to Tennessee Energy Partners. This involves legal, environmentally conscious drilling that will produce $12 million over 10 years, while keeping the surface of the land available for agriculture. Ms. Whitmore's development plan is not only deceitful, it is also superfluous. The commissioners appeared as if they had been struck by a bolt of lightning. Commissioner Hayes leaned in, carefully examining the drilling contract I had given him. "Mr. Morrison, are you asserting that this development plan was founded on inaccurate information?" "I am asserting that Patricia Whitmore has been orchestrating a fraudulent scheme to seize my family's land," I stated, "and I possess the proof to substantiate it." It was at that moment that the FBI agents made their presence known from the rear of the room. Special Agent Martinez came forward, his badge clearly displayed, and spoke in the calm, commanding tone that instills panic in the guilty. "Ms. Whitmore, you are being placed under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice, and infringement of federal civil rights laws." Patricia's flawless composure finally broke down completely. "This is not possible. You cannot do this. I have influence." You have the right to remain silent," Agent Martinez stated as his colleague approached Patricia from behind with handcuffs. The courtroom descended into mayhem. News cameras recorded every second as Patricia Whitmore was escorted out in handcuffs, while her legal team rushed to disassociate themselves from their now compromised client. But the moment that made the entire struggle worthwhile was when I glanced at the gallery and saw Mary Beth Chun initiating a standing ovation, which began with the older residents and then spread through the entire room like a tidal wave. As the commotion subsided, Commissioner Hayes struck his gavel one last time. "The economic development proposal is officially rescinded. Mr. Morrison, my congratulations on your drilling lease. And as for Ms. Whitmore," he paused, glancing at the vacant chair where she had been seated, "Ms. Whitmore is no longer a concern." Leaving that courthouse, I finally grasped what my grandfather meant when he said the land would provide for the family if the family cared for the land. Sometimes, caring for the land means you have to go to war for it. The consequences of Patricia Whitmore's dramatic undoing unfolded like a triumphant film. Only this time the heroes truly triumphed, and no one had to maintain the fiction that justice is impartial. Within 2 days of her apprehension, the repercussions began to cascade faster than a deck of cards in a strong wind. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation placed a freeze on all of Patricia's business assets and initiated a review of every HOA financial dealing over the previous 3 years. It was discovered that she had been embezzling association money to cover her gambling losses, amounting to nearly $200,000. Her legal license was put on hold while the criminal proceedings were underway. The Nashville law firm that had acted as co-counsel suddenly found they had scheduling issues and pulled out of all associated cases. Even her high-end BMW was taken back, a fact that brought me a certain kind of pleasure each time I passed the vacant space where she once parked it. The federal proceedings were brief and decisive. Patricia entered a guilty plea for conspiracy, fraud, and violations of civil rights, receiving a 3-year sentence instead of the 10 she could have faced. The judge mandated that she pay $2.3 million in damages, funds she did not possess, ensuring she would be making payments for the remainder of her life. But the true success was not in seeing Patricia dressed in prison attire. It was in the changes that occurred in my community as a result. The gas extraction began 6 months later, and Tennessee Energy Partners honored every commitment they had made. The environmental footprint was minimal, thanks to horizontal drilling that hardly disturbed the ground. The project created 50 local jobs during its construction and 20 permanent roles thereafter, and that initial royalty payment of $1.2 million was deposited into my bank account precisely on schedule. I used those funds to do something Earl would have admired. I founded the Earl Morrison Community Fund, which is committed to aiding family farms across Tennessee. It provides scholarships for agricultural students at the university, offers low-interest loans to young farmers looking to purchase their first piece of land, and maintains a legal defense fund for any landowner who faces the kind of intimidation I experienced. The HOA was dissolved by a unanimous decision once Patricia was no longer in charge. Without her controlling presence, the residents saw that they did not, in fact, require a 17-page document dictating the color of their mailboxes and the types of shrubs they could plant. Mary Beth Chun was chosen to lead a new, more straightforward neighborhood association that concentrated on genuine community issues rather than minor conflicts over power. I continued to farm, as that is the Morrison way. I enlarged the farm with a portion of the royalty earnings, purchased an additional 40 head of cattle, and brought Earl's old dairy barn back into operation. My girlfriend, Sarah, moved in with me last spring, and we are now making plans for a wedding next autumn, to be held right here on the farm, beneath the oak tree where Earl used to sit and observe the sunsets. The yearly Earl Morrison Harvest Festival has grown to be the most significant community gathering in the county. 5,000 people attend every October for bluegrass performances, offerings from local food producers, and a tribute to the way of life in small-town Tennessee before developers began converting farmland into housing tracts with grand, artificial names. Patricia's narrative has become a warning that has traveled well beyond our small part of Tennessee. Tommy's investigative report received a regional journalism prize, and the documentary that Netflix produced about the events made me into a sort of hero for defenders of property rights. I still receive messages from individuals dealing with similar HOA intimidation, seeking guidance on how to resist. My reply is consistently the same. Keep a record of everything. Be aware of your rights, and never misjudge the strength of a community when its members decide to unite against oppressors. The land that Earl Morrison purchased with a handshake and a vow is still held by the Morrison family, and it will remain so. The income from the drilling ensures that future generations will not have to be concerned about medical expenses, mortgage payments, or power-hungry HOA leaders attempting to take what their forebears created. But the most rewarding aspect of this entire experience is not the financial gain, the justice served, or even the gratification of seeing Patricia face the consequences of her actions. It is the feeling of sitting on Earl's old porch swing on a summer evening, hearing the creek flow and the cattle settling in for the night, with the knowledge that some things in this world are still worth fighting for.